to talk a little bit. First of all, I'm glad to be back. I have missed this class, but I'm back. So I'm very excited about that. I'm also very excited about all this data that has been gathered. We've got some of the posters on the wall here. We don't have everything. So we couldn't print everything, but what we've got is there's 36 of them. And what we've got on these walls here is a survey, if you like, of contemporary protests in South Africa. So what we've got are those that focus on the last year or two and in South Africa. So those who focused on something that happened 30 years ago or that happened in a different country or that's not actually a protest, we haven't printed those because they're not an effective part of our data set. So that will be those that listened to Sue, who obviously gave poor instructions.
Some people don't know that these are on a Canva. And I have sent more than one email to let you know that these are already on a Canva, already sitting there. So you have access to all of these.
So what we have is an archive of protests. When you are 70 and your great-grandchildren say to you, what was happening in 2015 and 2016 and 2017? You'll be able to point them to this archive. So this is a historical archive that you have created about the events over the last 2 or 3 years that have rocked higher education, they've rocked South Africa, the protests that have rocked South Africa. Because these protests, there's some record of them, but some of them will just vanish. They're individual protests, there's a whole range of things. There's individual protests, there's marches, there's social media stuff going on. It's a wide range of things, as these posters illustrate. So what we want to do now, what we want to do in this class, and what your task is to write a high-level analysis of these protests. What kind of generalizations can we develop about these protests? We know about this one, we know about that one, we know about this one and that one and the other one. All these protests, masses and masses of protests. Every second week there's a protest. What kinds of big picture analysis can we make of that? So that's the task now, that's the analysis piece. So you've looked at the literature, you've looked at what other researchers have said about other protests, or even some of these protests. Now the task is, what do you think, having read what other people have said, having looked at the data, what are your thoughts about these protests? So how we're going to run this class is, first of all we're going to record it. We are recording it. I am being recorded as I speak. And what we want to do is record the class because it becomes another data set. This whole class will then, these are the people who are going to be doing our preliminary analysis. We'll come to them now. So we'll put this recording onto a Canva, and you can quote from this recording. So you don't need to take notes of this class because it's going to be recorded. Does anybody have any reason for saying we shouldn't record the class? Anybody got any anxiety? Because we do need to have permission. You good with this? Because you guys are on the ball, on the spot. Anybody got any anxieties? Then please feel free to express them. We're good to go. So Andre's good to go. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so this recording it'll be on a Canva. It's not going to be released into the universe. It's on a Canva. It's for us to draw on. Okay, does anybody have any questions so far? So what you're going to be doing for your next assignment is writing a high-level analysis of the protests. Your poster, your data is just part of the archive. Don't privilege your own data. It's part of the archive. So what you will need to do is pick, 8 or 10 or however many, the more the merrier, actually. If you want to say something like, these protests focused on X, you need to be saying that I've looked at, well, does your analysis carry more weight if you looked at 3 posters or 15? Yeah? Does that make sense? The more posters you look at, the more authority with which you will speak when you say, this is what these protests look like. This is the kind of sense that we can make of the protests. So what we're doing today is a preliminary analysis, and we have persuaded some volunteers. Were you volunteered or were you bullied and pushed? Bullied. They were bullied. They're saying they're bullied. But it wasn't me that bullied anyone. So we've asked them, you've got a piece of paper with questions on. So each one of them has taken one of those questions, and they've looked at, I think, 10 posters. 9.
They've looked at this group of posters.
They've looked at this group of posters here, okay. You'll see that each poster is labelled. That's number 1, that's number 9, it's number 32. So if you're going to talk about a poster, you talk about it as artifact, whatever number it is. Keep record of that. And so what we have now is a preliminary analysis of those questions that you have. You also, so they're going to tell you, each one is going to talk to you a little bit about what they see in the posters, but you've also looked at these posters. So some of you have looked at these, but some of you have looked at different ones. So you might find that they say something about the posters, and you think, but actually that's not what I'm looking at over here. We want to hear from you. What we want is a generic brain, if you like. Everybody's ideas about all these posters, which then becomes something that you use and draw on in your analysis. Is this making sense? Crystal clear? I haven't lost my touch. Is that what you're saying? Yeah? Then I'm going to hand over to Sue.
Okay, so we've got 4 panelists, and the 5th, unfortunately, is 6. So, but she did send me through her thoughts, so I will just read those out. So we've got Celinda Kuchle is doing question 1, who is doing the protesting. Kelly is doing what are the protests about. I'll do question 3. Andy Siwe is going to look at who the audience is, who the protests are primarily aimed at. Jacina is going to do number 5. What impact do the messages have on their audience? And then I think Lindsay probably will pick up question 6. But also, this is an opportunity for general discussion as well. The class is about all of us sharing our ideas and thoughts. So we're going to kick things off, but yeah, it's also for you guys to share your thoughts, questions, comments.
Stick a hand up if you've got something to say, if you want to ask a question, because this really is a conversation. They haven't done the analysis for you. They're just starting the conversation. So we need to develop it you need to develop it with them. Yeah?
Hi guys. So I'm doing question 1, as Lindsay has said, and mine is very short because I'm just wondering who is doing the protesting. So for artifact 1, there's a poster written "The Total Shutdown," and I'm assuming that it is a group of women who are protesting. And even though there's a man in front, but he seems to be someone who is. Oh, it looks like a statue, isn't it? Artifact 1, that one. Yes. So basically, it is just a group of women who are protesting against gender-based violence, and yeah. And then for artifact 3, which is the second one, people who were they wore like specific colors on that day, red and black, to show unity, and it is also a group of women protesting, but it is government staff who were protesting that day. They were also protesting against gender-based violence. So basically, already there's like a pattern between the first one and the second one in terms of what they're protesting about. And artifact 4. Yes, that one. It also represents people who are part of the protest. And in this one, it's not just women, but they're like women of different race. And you can also see, I'm not quite sure if the guy who's passing by is also part of the protest, but I think he is. So there's a guy as well, but not a lot of men. So it's just basically like a group of women who are also protesting during the total shutdown as well. So again, another protest that is against gender-based violence. So it was like people from the LGBTIQ community, women from different races. So it wasn't just like one race, but like a group of women who came together to protest against gender-based violence. And then Artifact 5 is quite different from the first three that I've done. Is that one? It's an individual who is protesting in form of how he dresses and all of that, basically how he performs his gender. So for him, that is a way that he is protesting against like the norms that have been attached or stereotypes that have been attached to him and everything. And then Artifact 6, this one here at the bottom. For this one, this is not really like a person per se who is protesting, but the poster represents a form of a protest that will take place on a specific day, and it's written on the 10th of August. So I said that this poster, even though they're not people who are literally like protesting, but it is a form of protest as it speaks on gender violence and fighting against it. So so they're not people per se, but it's just a poster speaking on a protest that is going to take place. And it's also a form of activism, speaking against gender-based violence as well. And then the next one, Artifact 7, it's a picture of, I think it's a payslip or something like that, yes, that one. Again, there's not a person protesting, but already like the picture is representing some form of protest, which is speaking against unequal pay in a workplace, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, it's basically like a representation of what the protest or activism is about, and it's about women demanding equal pay. So we could say that in this case, when you answer the question, who's protesting, it's just basically like an illustration, but representing what women are protesting against. And the second to last one is Artifact 8. Yes, that one. Again, you see that it is a group of women who are protesting, and it's not just black women, Indian or colored, it's just like women from different races, culture, came together to protest against domestic violence as well. And I think it was also during the total shutdown as well. As you can see that they're also wearing black and red, as that was the order of the day as mentioned in the first one, where women were wearing black and red to also represent, to be like in unity, basically. And the last one, I think it is. No, it's not. This is the second to last one, sorry. Artifact 9. Yes, that one. As some of you guys know that there was like men's rape culture here in our institution. But it was always there. It's just that like whenever we spoke up about it, it wasn't given much attention. So in 2017, again, UWC students, so people who are protesting here are UWC students. It's not just women, again, it's students from different cultures, different communities in terms of others belonging to the LGBTIQ community. And they were basically protesting against the rape culture that has always been happening, but it was more, like people were speaking more about it last year, I think, and that's when most protests against the rape culture in University of Western Cape took place. And then the last one, yes, Artifact 10. People who are protesting again, it is a group of women. If there are any men, there's quite a few, but it's mainly women, a group of women who are also protesting against gender-based violence. And again, it's not just women from a certain or specific culture, women of different cultures and different races who came together to protest against gender-based violence. And yeah.
Thank you very much. So can I ask the class, if you had to make a generalization answering that question about who is doing the protesting, what would you say? How would you generalize? How could you start to tease out an answer, the character of these protests, based on those 10 that have been discussed there? You've listened to an analysis, a description of each poster. What kind of bigger picture do you think there is? How would you characterize that protest? Yeah?
And it's mostly women of colour that are protesting against gender-based violence.
Okay, so it's mostly women of colour. Although you heard this,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a generalization.
So how would one write that?
I don't know, I'm not there yet.
I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Is how does one write this in one's analysis? So does anybody want to add anything to that it's mostly women of colour? From the posters that you've been looking at now, do you think that's true? Do you think that's an accurate... So it's mostly women, and it's mostly women of colour. Do you think that's an accurate... If you were talking to your grandchild when you were 70, do you think this would be a fairly accurate thing to say? So then the way one writes this is you point to the posters that support your claim, but you can't ignore the ones that don't. You've got to be able to say, but there are exceptions. There are protests where men are involved. There are protests where there are white women involved. There are protests, as we can see here, but that the majority of these protests around sexual and gender justice over this period involved women of colour, or black women, however you want to say that. Then another question arises around class. Are they poor women? Can you tell that? Are they rich women? Are they urban women? Are they rural women? So one starts to think a little bit about who are these people that you've got. What's the body of people in this country that are angry enough to protest over and over and over again in different shapes and sizes and forms and ways? Is this making sense? Okay. Does anybody want to add anything to that? Because I don't want to be talking, I'm not going to be talking now. So now that you've got the idea of what to be doing, how to be thinking about this, we're going to go on to the next question.
So I'm doing question 2, and that is what are protests about? So when analyzing the data, I came across that these, the posters can be divided into certain themes, and I've divided these themes as challenging rape culture and gender-based violence in South Africa, protests that advocate for queer visibility and equality, and gender inequality in all places, including the workplace. So in the first category, most of the data use protests that challenge injustices such as rape culture and gender-based violence in South Africa. And the main aim is to end women abuse and femicide that is perpetrated by men and often reinforced through society. Examples of these include Artifact 1, Artifact 4, Artifact 6, Artifact 8, and Artifact 9. And they all have the main focus on ending rape culture and gender-based violence in South Africa, and they create awareness of the enormous suffering that many women and non-conforming individuals have to endure. An example, a more deeper example is in Artifact 9, which focuses on the UWC rape protest, and it's obviously close to home as it happened on our very campus. And through this protest, it created awareness of the rampant rape culture that is seen on campus. And the aim was to also confront how university management handles these rape cases, as many do not handle the rape cases with care. This protest sparked major media attention and even trended on Twitter, as and it also created that university management actually confronted the issue. In the second category, for protests for queer and gay visibility and equality for gender non-conforming individuals, the data that use total shutdown protests can also be included, as the protest was open to all women and gender non-conforming individuals that want to challenge gender inequalities and the gender binaries that are so very good. Another example is Artifact 5, that shows a proudly gay male breaking the gender binary by wearing clothes that are not necessarily masculine in terms of the societal standards that are placed on many of us today. And through this form of activism, it therefore challenges the heteronormative ideals as well that society wishes to impose on many of us. Another category that I categorize is equality in all places, including the workplace. And Artifact 7 can be used in this regard, as it focuses on the gender pay gap, and it says that it's dehumanizing for women to get lesser pay just because they are a woman. Also, you can also use Artifact 2 to confront gender equality in the workplace, as the government workers protested and were advocates in the workplace by wearing black and protesting against the various inequalities, be it through gender pay gap or the injustice against women in general. So the main messages of the protest that I saw was equality for all genders, regardless of gender identity, sexual orientation. And the main theme is that all sorts of gender injustices should obviously be challenged and eventually eradicated. Therefore, it can be said that the patterns and themes are all very similar, although the topics tend to differ. Thank you.
Did you see what she did there? Did you see posters that would support those three categories? Or are there possibly more than three categories?
I think she was spot on in that the broad theme was focused on women and members of the LGBTIQ community, and then there were sub-themes to that as well, where there were some posters that did purely focus on rape and violence, and then some on inequality. She mentioned one about the government staff with protesting for equal pay. I also saw a similar one with the Metro Police doing the same thing. And in terms of same inequality for genders as well, apart from pay, there's also in the home, there's an individual one over here, where when you read the caption along with that photo, the person explains that household chores are designated for her, yet she has two older male siblings who are not expected to do that. And that picture was in protest of that too, which goes back to and supports her points. So I would agree.
So you like those three categories then?
I think they neatly put, yeah.
And it's all on video, so you can go and revisit them. But maybe there's another category somewhere that and somebody else would like to think about, if anything strikes you. What about the panel? Do you want to comment on? Anyone? Okay. Thank you very much. Should we move on?
Thank you. Okay, Nikita isn't here, but I'll just read out what she sent to me this morning. So she said, when looking at the data, I noticed that many of the images represented protests whereby large groups of... Okay, sorry, it's question 3, which is what kinds of protests are there, or how are they done, and what mediums and modalities. Okay, so she noticed that many of the images represented protests whereby large groups of people marched together for the same causes, i.e. gender injustices, rape, etc. In these marches, people protested carrying signs, post-its, placards, which expressed their individual viewpoints, but they marched as a collective, showing a unified force against the issue. Differing from this is the image of the queer man. His form of protest is not a mass movement, but rather being himself. The narrative discusses how communities are not accepting of those who are different, so his existence and refusal to bend to their ideals is a protest in itself against their societal norms. This is interesting because it shows that you don't only have to march to protest, but by living your truth, you are able to challenge norms, and that becomes a form of protest. I also noticed that there's an aspect of internet protest as well. The images that were used would probably have been shared across social media, bringing light to the grievances of the protesters. The image representing unequal pay in South Africa mentions that there was a rally attended by the president, and images from this rally were shared on Twitter and Facebook. Social media is a good way to reach a larger audience to express views, but also it is a way for people to show their solidarity if they are unable to march by sharing those images. Social media has become a means for education and protest as information is most readily available and easily accessible.
Comments? Thoughts? Do you think that the protests over the last 3-4 years would they have happened if we didn't have the kind of social media that we have now? How important has social media been, do you think, in shaping these protests?
I think it's crucial. I think it has significantly raised awareness. I think it's even encouraged others to join these protests, because when we're sitting in silos, you don't know if other people have the same views that you're having, and social media helps us to share our ideas and our thoughts.
One of the things that I thought was interesting about the individual protests was that this project actually recorded that, because as you say, nobody would ever know that you're having a fight with your parents about doing the washing up. Yeah. That's just something, it's just part of everyday life. But now it's part of the archive, and that one sees those, which the social media maybe didn't work so much in that context. But it gets people who are angry about having to do the washing up together out on a street somewhere else. Anybody else any thoughts about the modalities? A lot of marches. What do you think?
I was thinking about what the student had said, and I don't know which way to, if this is the correct way to put it, but it's sort of a double layer of protest. So the one is the actual march, but then it's this been taken up on social media and how it's then used on social media as well as another avenue of protest. So the very same march then gets used, and it cascades in a different medium. It's a spin-off here. So I thought that comment was very interesting of what the student had said.
Other thoughts? Those posters that you had a look at? Anything strike you? What a quiet class you are.
What about compared to your posters, your artifacts?
So here's another question then as well, and it's around the marches, because they get a lot of publicity. So is there a danger, do you think, that these the individual protests that actually